It's November 1996, and John Carmack has just ported id Software's latest hit Quake to the OpenGL API. It will be the second and last supported API after Speedy 3D, used for their first 3D accelerated game, VQuake, made for Rendition's Verite graphics card released just a few months prior. A direct 3D version is planned as well, but will ultimately never be finished, as the first version of the API will prove to be a very unfriendly programming environment. 3dfx's Voodoo 1 has just been released, and although it seems destined to be a hit, it has no OpenGL support. There is a budget-friendly card with OpenGL support intended for consumers, 3D Labs per Media, but it's plagued with visual bugs and some not-so-great performance. So instead, John is using a card largely unknown to most enthusiasts, the mysterious Intergraph RealiZm Z13T. In December, he writes in one of his public .plan entries about his opinions on the performance of various cards in the new OpenGL version of Quake, which he calls GLQuake. Intergraph's older GLZ1T isn't as impressive, but then it's announced that their new RealiZm card will offer the best available performance for Windows NT with OpenGL support. And it's no wonder, with an estimated price between $7,000 to $12,000, it should be the best. So in this episode, we'll take a look at the Intergraph RealiZm Z13T, the card on which GLQuake was born and tested. This card is so rare because the only way to obtain it was by buying a whole workstation for about $30,000 or more. But first, as always, a little bit of history.
Command and control, the process of directing and coordinating military forces to accomplish their mission. Warfare has become so sophisticated that computer automation is essential in speeding accurate, real-time information between command posts. Commanders and their staff must monitor the use and availability of personnel, equipment, and facilities. They must gather, analyze, and display information for making decisions in already stressful situations, and use secure tools for communicating instructions and supervising operations in the field. Intergraph solutions link command posts and assist commanders in making intelligent command and control decisions. Intergraph analyzes your needs, infrastructure, facilities, and resources, and pulls together all the hardware, software, service, and support in a tightly integrated open platform using a simple graphics user interface. Intergraph's command and control systems use commercially available Intergraph and third-party products that are tested and proven, helping us integrate numerous disciplines and reduce development time and risk. One example of Intergraph's command and control experience is our Patriot Command Post Automation System, combining air defense technology with digital mapping for an air picture display in the battalion command post. A network of workstations exchanging graphical data for tactical planning and force operations. Intergraph provided one country with an air defense command and control system, incorporating command and control staff functions and battle management. Operators use displays of real-time air operations and weapon systems control. Intergraph's cost-effective solutions support an open platform and provide a user-friendly interface, are compatible with a mixed network environment, can be adapted and configured to specific work processes, and exchange information without duplicating efforts. Intergraph's automated solutions for command and control, giving you the information you need the instant you need it.
The promo video you just saw sums up the typical services provided by the company to its wealthy customers, but it wouldn't be until many years later when they'd be able to supply software on their own hardware platforms. Intergraph was founded in 1969 as M&S Computing by 5 ex-IBM engineers who were developing guidance software for Saturn rockets. Their first product was a computer graphics system used for designing printed circuit boards by the federal government. They then used a modified version of the system for mapping the city of Nashville in 1974, and soon they became an important supplier of mapping software. This, along with ongoing development of printed circuit design software, would be an important source for the company's income in the decades to come. The next step for the company was to venture into process plant design and heavy engineering software. Up until the 1980s, all of this software was running predominantly on 16-bit PDP-11 computers, which were later replaced by 32-bit VAX systems, both from DEC. These were shipped with Intergraph's own dual-screen graphics terminals based on a Motorola chipset. In 1985, the company started selling a standalone Unix-based workstation called the Interpro 32, based on the 32016 CPU from National Semiconductor. It could also act as a terminal to VAX computers, but its 16-bit CPU made it quite slow. National Semiconductor initially promised faster 32032 32-bit CPUs, but these were never produced in high quantities. So Intergraph switched to Fairchild Semiconductor's Clipper microprocessor in 1986 and released 2 workstations and 2 servers based on it. Once again, they were running a Unix operating system and retained the terminal functionality. Prices for the workstations ranged from $29,000 to $72,000. In 1997, an updated variant was released along with a high-end GZ graphics accelerator as an option. The GZ accelerator would mark the beginning of a successful line of high-end graphics cards for the company. The Clipper-based series of Unix workstations would see updates up until 1993, alongside improved Edge and GT series graphics cards.
The computer universe, forever evolving, forever changing. Hardware has become more powerful, while becoming smaller and more personal. Intergraph has been an industry pioneer for the past 25 years, consistently delivering state-of-the-art power for the technical professional.
This is TD Power Leader, TD line approaching station TD.
TD Power Leader, this is Station TD. We have you on acquisition. Copy.
TD Leader, request docking status.
Roger, TD Leader. Stand by. All stations report.
PCI bus ready.
ISA bus ready.
ISA bus ready.
Roger, TD Leader. Main memory expanding to 64, 192, and 256 megabytes.
TD Leader, be advised. EPA Energy Star compliance now employed.
10 base T and AUI network ports at system level, local and ready.
Graphics subsystems local, fast, and ready.
SCSI 2 channels engaged and spinning.
I/O ports open and flowing. All system peripherals are available.
TD1, 48666, now shipping.
TD2 66 MHz Pentium now shipping.
TD3, 90 MHz Pentium now shipping.
TD4 dual 90 megahertz Pentiums ready and shipping.
TD5 dual 90 MHz Pentiums desk side ready and shipping.
TD line is empowered. TD line is empowered. Stand by for personal power transfer. 3, 2, 1. Power up.
Intergraph, powerful but personal. Personal workstations from Intergraph. Intergraph Computer Systems.
In 1993, Intergraph shifted into PC compatibles, which offered cheaper hardware and a much wider range of compatible software, the lack of which was one of the big disadvantages of Unix machines. The first PC compatibles were based on Intel's 486DX at 66 MHz and had support for both DOS and Windows NT. In 1994, machines based on the Pentium 66 were released, called the TD2, utilizing Witek's P9000 graphics board. It was soon followed by the TD3, TD4, and TD5 with 90 MHz Pentiums, plus a high-performance GLI graphics accelerator. TD5 with dual 27-inch monitors could cost upwards of $58,000. In early 1995, these systems got a faster 100 MHz CPU and were renamed the TDZ30, TDZ40, and TDZ60. The latter and faster TDZ60 model had 128 MB of memory with a maximum support of 1 GB and up to 6 processors. In late 1995, they brought out systems equipped with Pentium Pro CPUs at 150 or 200 MHz, along with a new line of GLZ accelerators. One of these were used by id Software during the development phase of Quake, as we can see indicated in John Carmack's speed report. But GLQuake saw its first test on one of the new TD Z13, TD Z410, or TD Z610 workstations, which had 1, 2, or 4 Pentium Pro 200 MHz processors, first released in July 1996. All of them came equipped with either the new RealiZm Z10, Z13, or Z25 graphics cards. Prices ranged from $9,995 up to $70,000 and beyond. RealiZm cards were also rebranded as PowerStorm and sold by DEC in their alpha-based workstations. In 1997, an upgraded RealiZm 2 line of graphics accelerators saw release along with faster workstations. In practical terms, RealiZm 2 cards were only a bit faster, with higher clocks and better texture memory. More important was the announcement of the Intense 3D Pro cards, which were stripped down and more integrated variants of RealiZm 2 cards with less memory. They were only released into the OEM market, and as a result, these were the first cards that could be purchased outside of a complete Intergraph workstation. In 1998, we'd see the launch of Intergraph's new line of graphics cards called the Wildcat series. It was at this point Intergraph started offering all their cards to OEM vendors, and each came equipped with geometry acceleration. The first add-on card was made for the AGP slot, but later models had it integrated into the main PCB. Their last announced card came in April 2000, the Wildcat 4210, which now had dual pipelines. At that time, NVIDIA already had 4-pipe cards, both the GeForce 256 and the new Quadro workstations based on the same GPU. This, along with the company's worsening financial situation, led to the selling of Intergraph's entire graphics division to its competitor 3D Labs in that same year. 3D Labs continued developing the Wildcat architecture until 2006, at which point they too left the graphics market, and that would mark the fall of one of the last surviving titans of the professional graphics market. Since then, the market would be split between NVIDIA and ATI, later known as AMD. So that concludes the history portion of the video. So now let's take a look at some differences between classic graphics cards designed for games and those of the professional market from the 90s. Many of the latter had some pretty major downsides from the perspective of a retro gamer, making them effectively only shelf pieces for collectors. The only exceptions to this were a few mainstream and low-end 3D Labs models. The first downside was that professional cards tend to be long. Almost all cards were full length, with a sturdy plastic or metal card holder attached at the end for preventing PCB bending. Today, we're used to seeing very long, high-end gaming cards occupying 2 or 3 slots, but in the 90s, this was more an indicator of an expensive professional card. A typical consumer card, like the Voodoo 1 shown here, was a lot smaller. Beyond just their massive length, some even needed a second PCB because of the second downside. Containing the entire graphics pipeline in one small chip was something only suitable for mainstream gaming and 2D cards. Real performance needed many chips, not unlike a Voodoo 1 or 2, but on a much bigger and more expensive scale. Some cards even had optional texturing modules, which were needed for rendering textures, and the price was astronomical. Most early cards had a texture memory bank separate from the frame buffer. Each part of the memory had its own bus, which thus increased the overall memory bandwidth. Of course, as a result, the board complexity and cost of manufacturing also rose. The upside of this approach was that it made it possible to offer options with or without frame buffer memory and various amounts of texture memory. Texture memory could be offered for a high premium, and in extreme cases might have even exceeded the cost of the entire card on its own. There were of course different memory types available as well, with some being more optimized for texturing operations, such as CD-RAM. You may even find cheaper cards such as those of the HP Visualize line, which utilize a 64-bit PCI interface, but setting up a testbed motherboard for it might be a waste of time, because most professional cards utilizing 64-bit PCI were built for Unix-based workstations and are not compatible with standard PCs. These workstations were typically based around various architectures such as DEC Alpha, HP PA RISC, or IBM Power. If a variant of a professional card is available with either PCI or AGP, then you can be reasonably sure that only the AGP version will work on your PC, with very few exceptions. Many early cards had a second graphics chip with its own memory to provide DOS support, as it wasn't deemed necessary to designate a portion of one of the custom graphics chips for a feature that was only needed at boot. Of course, VGA support was also needed during the Windows installation process, but beyond that it was largely an ancillary feature, and various 2D and sometimes even basic 3D chips were used for the task, typically equipped with anywhere between 512K to 2 megabytes of memory. Another major downside? Don't expect DirectX or Windows 98 compatibility. All cards were built for OpenGL and Windows NT, the typical environment for a professional platform. The few companies that bothered with DirectX support only did so around the year 2000 and later, but you didn't get the usual level of game compatibility expected of a typical consumer graphics card. 3D Labs was among those companies, with Windows 9X driver support going back to the 90s, and even some curious situations where a 98 driver might have Direct3D support but no OpenGL support, whereas Windows NT drivers would support OpenGL but didn't bother with Direct3D. And the last downside of professional cards is a simple one. There was no support for 16-bit color in games or applications. Most cards even went so far as to forbid the use of 16-bit color mode on the desktop. The support simply wasn't there. For the professional market, it was 32-bit color or nothing. With the unpleasantries out of the way, we can get back to our particular card. The RealiZm Z13 was sold only as part of an Intergraph workstation and wasn't made available as a standalone product. The RealiZm line was only the second generation of 3D cards made for PC compatibles, and Intergraph marketed them as the first x86 machines to be able to compete with the likes of SGI Unix-based workstations. Their TDZ workstations had been shipping since August of 1996, equipped with 1, 2, or even 4 Pentium Pro CPUs clocked at 200 MHz. Our card came in a machine with dual Pentium Pros, 128 MB of system memory, and a 4 GB SCSI drive. The RealiZm line had 4 models. The lower-end Z10 had limited resolution support and lower memory sizes. The mid-range Z13 had 16 MB of framebuffer memory and texture memory up to 64 MB in size. The high-end Z25 had 2 additional resolver chips allowing for a higher maximum resolution and an increased 32 MB framebuffer. Then on the ultra high-end side of things, you had the V25, identical to the Z variant aside from a higher clock texture unit, which subsequently improved the texturing performance. All the cards in the line could be upgraded by adding more texturing memory modules denoted with a T at the end of the name. Another option was the Geometry Accelerator card, which was denoted in the model name with the G. We'll be testing the RealiZm Z13T equipped with dual resolver chips. These are used for generating images and performing fill rate based operations. Each is assigned with its own 8 MB of SDR framebuffer memory through a 128-bit memory bus. In the center between them is a texture engine chip with its own 16 MB of SDR memory on a separate 128-bit memory bus. The slots for texture memory are compatible with standard SDR modules, but the driver checks their speed and rejects them if you're not using Intergraph's special modules. Luckily, we've been able to source some modules from a DEC PowerStorm 4D50T card, which is a licensed Intergraph card with lower clocks sold with DEC alpha-based workstations. Sadly, even these memories are too slow for the next generation RealiZm 2 cards from 1997, so we can't show you the performance of the card's successor in games. Even more rare are the geometry accelerators, which we don't have in this test. The usual suite of test cards, the 3DFX Voodoo 1 and NVIDIA Riva 128, aren't usable this time around. The Voodoo doesn't have enough memory for the professional application benchmarks, and the Riva 128 is missing Windows 2000 and XP drivers. So we had to find something that has similar performance to the Voodoo, but with more memory, 32-bit rendering, and the necessary driver support. As it happens, ATI's Rage Pro Turbo meets all these requirements. It's just a renamed Rage Pro chip, which was originally released in 1997 and sold in 1998 as a cheap OEM multimedia card. These cards were sold for so long that they even got an official Windows XP driver. That is desirable because the original Intergraph workstation that our RealiZm Z13T came with was sold off decades ago, so we need some sort of suitable replacement. It's best to stick with dual CPUs, as most 3D rendering software was written with support from more than one. After all, a dual or quad CPU configuration was a main differentiator between a gaming PC and professional machine at the time. But as usual around here, we don't care so much about period correct machines. We want to squeeze every frame we can from our graphics card, and as much as possible, we don't want to be limited by our CPU. So our motherboard of choice is a very big and long Tian Thunder K7X Pro, equipped with two Athlon MP 2400 plus CPUs running at 2 GHz, along with 2 GB of DDR memory at 400 MHz. This board has all the ports you could ever want for testing and comparing workstation cards. An AGP Pro 4X universal slot that supports all AGP cards from AGP 1X to 8X, 64-bit PCI slots in case you're lucky enough to find one of the very few workstation cards on the interface that are PC compatible, and 3 standard PCI slots for even older cards. All this is powered by Windows XP, but Windows 2000 or NT would have no issues running on the system. Luckily, most of the cards have Windows 2000 drivers, which we can use with XP, and many NT drivers will work as well. And some tests will also show you results from other professional workstation cards of that era, just for comparison. First, we'll take a look at the drivers. These are for Windows 2000, but have no issues running in XP. They're also unified with support for all Intergraph cards, starting with the launch of the RealiZm line in 1996, up until the last cards from 1999. On the first information screen is some useful info about the card model and memory sizes. The rest of the info won't be of much use to a typical user such as ourselves. In the Performance tab is the all-important Wait for Sync toggle, as well as a lines anti-aliasing option which would have been useful for professional applications. The Advanced tab focuses on stereo glasses support, which of course we don't have. The Monitor tab can show all supported resolutions as well as DDC info from the connected monitor. The Color Calibration tab allows for only the adjustment of gamma values. And finally, from the drop-down menu, you can choose presets for various models of monitors, which were for sure too expensive for any consumer to buy in the 90s. That's it for drivers, and common utilities for viewing information such as ADA, hardware info, or power strip don't support these types of cards, so we have no way of detecting core and memory clocks. GLQuake in 32-bit color mode shows almost identical performance to a Voodoo 1, which was tested on a slower Pentium 3 CPU at 1 GHz. Sadly, the Voodoo 1 has issues with faster CPUs. You have to keep in mind that the Voodoo only renders in 16-bit colors, and even among the early cards that supported 32-bit color, using it had a huge impact on FPS. That's clearly visible with the numbers we're getting from the Rage Pro Turbo. In 16-bit mode, it's quite close to the Voodoo, but 32-bit takes away about 6 FPS. Quake II loses about 6 FPS on the Intergraph card, making it barely playable. ATI's Rage Pro Turbo falls well under 20 and is only really usable in 16-bit mode. The Voodoo 1 is on top, but only by 1 FPS. lighting must be set to vertex in Quake III to get a playable framerate. The RealiZm card is then able to retain the same performance level it got in Quake II. The Rage Pro Turbo needs to be switched to 16-bit color once again, otherwise the game is unplayable. Kingpin is a game based on the Quake II engine, but clearly with higher requirements. Even with disabled shadows and fog, it's barely playable, with FPS drops well below 20 on both tested cards. Half-Life seems to be okay on both cards, with Intergraph in the lead by about 6 FPS, but in more complex scenes that are dropped below 20 on both cards.
Of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel. The time is 8:47 a.m. Current topside temperature is 93 degrees, with an estimated high of 105. The Black Mesa compound is maintained at a pleasant 68 degrees at all times. This train is inbound from Level 3 dormitories to Sector C test labs and control facilities. If your intended destination is a high security area beyond Sector C, you will need to return to the Central Transit Hub in Area 9 and board a high security train. If you have not yet submitted your identity to the retinal clearance system, you must report to Black Mesa personnel for processing before you will be permitted into the high security branch of the transit system. Due to the high toxicity of material routinely handled in the Black Mesa compound. No smoking, eating, or drinking are permitted within the Black Mesa transit system. Please keep your limbs inside the train at all times. Do not attempt to open the doors until the train has come to a complete halt at the station platform. In the event of an emergency, passengers are to remain seated and await further instruction. If it is necessary to exit the train, disabled personnel should be evacuated first.
Unreal isn't a well-suited game for our contestants. Realism doesn't shine at only 14 FPS on average. The Rage Pro Turbo crashes repeatedly in OpenGL mode after only a few seconds. Direct 3D mode works, but with flashing and disappearing textures, producing only 21 FPS, with drops all the way down to 9 in 16-bit color, which isn't exactly a great result. Unreal Tournament is much more gentle by comparison, and the performance we're getting is much better. But in OpenGL, the game is too dark, despite setting the brightness to maximum. The Rage Pro Turbo is useless in 32-bit color mode, and on top of that, it's also even uglier in Direct 3D mode.
In 2291, in an attempt to control violence among deep space miners, the New Earth government legalized no-holds-barred fighting. The Andrew Mining Corporation, working with the NEG, established a series of leagues and bloody public exhibitions. The fight's popularity grew with their brutality. Soon, the Andrew discovered that the public matches were their most profitable enterprise. The professional league was formed. A cabal of the most violent and skilled warriors in known space, selected to fight in a grand tournament. Now it is 2341. 50 years have passed since the founding of Deathmatch. Profits from the tournament number in the hundreds of billions. You have been selected to fight in the professional league by the Leandro Rules Board. Your strength and brutality are legendary. The time has come to prove you are the best. To crush your enemies. To win the tournament.
With the gaming test behind us, it's now time to run some synthetic benchmarks. We'll start with a new test called GPUBench. It measures basic values like pixel, texel, and triangle rate in various rendering modes. It's been made to be compatible with the widest possible range of OpenGL cards and can even be run on non-PC compatible machines. First, we'll take a look at the pixel fill rate with ZBuffer enabled. The fill rate reflects performance for scenes that aren't using textures, which is exactly the area where workstation cards should shine the most. Realism with Z-buffering is a bit behind, but without it can go up to 80 megapixels. The second test shows performance while rendering low-resolution textures which reflect the typical gaming scenario. All cards without texture memory drop to the bottom under the Diamond Fire GL3000. This card clearly demonstrates the strategy of most early workstation cards. Put everything into fill rate performance and don't bother caring too much about the texel rate, because working with textured 3D models wasn't a typical use case. Gaming cards, on the other hand, needed the texel fill rate to be as high as possible. The triangle rate test shows the performance of graphics cards doing scene geometry computing. This was done on most gaming-oriented cards too, with only the oldest ones leaving this job to the processor. Early games had very simple geometry compared to your typical professional workload, but as time went on, gaming chip makers started to increase the numbers in this area after the release of DirectX 7. That version introduced transform and lighting, and thus new cards like NVIDIA's GeForce 256 could now compete with professional cards in terms of features and performance. NVIDIA promptly entered the professional workstation market with the first Quadro card, utilizing the same NV10 GPU with more memory, and it completely destroyed most of the competition thanks to its good performance and low manufacturing cost. Another test is called XSMark, which can be seen as an OpenGL alternative to 3DMark 2001. It's much less famous, of course, but has very low requirements and can be run on almost anything. The Rage Pro Turbo is much slower in some scenes, dropping the FPS to 3 or even less. Cinebench 2000 measures performance in Cinema 4D, a well-known modeling program from Maxon. The first test renders using the CPU, and then it tests 3D acceleration via OpenGL. Results are shown as CB points and GL factor, giving us an idea of how much faster rendering is performed with the help of a graphics card. In our case, it's actually slower, but you have to keep in mind that at the time of release, CPUs were clocked 10 times lower than our Athlons at 2 GHz. ATI's Rage card is suffering here from a rendering window issue, which is covering the benchmarks menu. Cinebench 2003 is an even worse situation, a test which also has support for hardware TNL. The Rage Pro Turbo probably doesn't have enough memory here, and it sinks to the absolute bottom of the stack. And the scene also isn't rendered properly, which isn't helping. That was another reason to prefer using professional graphics cards. They were the only ones to get certified by software developers, and that ensured that end users didn't wind up with badly rendered scenes. ATI did improve performance quite a lot with the next generation of chips, called the Rage 128, released in 1999, as you can see in the results graph alongside the other cards. SPECviewperf is our last benchmark and most workstation-centric one to this point. Its history dates back to 1994, when it was developed by IBM and later updated with many other modeling engines. It's a multi-platform design as it supports not only x86 Windows workstations, but also various Unix-based machines using exotic architectures from Sun, SGI, IBM, or Compaq. Sadly, the oldest version we found was 6.1.1, released in 1999. In the style of 3DMark benchmarks, it pushes performance to the max using very big and complex models. Testing is relatively simple. The model is loaded into the rendering software and a rotation is applied via a preset number of frames. At the end, it tallies the time it took rendering using the various modes, such as wireframe, shaded, with or without textures, and so on. The time it takes to benchmark thus depends on the speed of the card, and testing older models can often take several hours. So we only have results on version 6.1.1 from the 2 cards used in our testing. ATI unfortunately fails every test, but Intergraph's RealiZm is at least usable in the advanced visualizer rendering test. More results are available in version 6.1.2 from 2002. It's basically the same, only with more complex models and with one additional test. Once again, the advanced visualizer is the only one where we got a somewhat usable frame rate on the Intergraph card. The other tests are too demanding, not only for our cards, but also for much later ones. An extreme example is the Lightscape test, where we didn't even get to 10 FPS on even the fastest cards. And now we've finally reached the conclusion. The RealiZm Z13T has performance similar to that of the Voodoo 1, but with 32-bit colors. You can also enjoy a desktop resolution up to 1280 by 1024 with very good image quality. What's very unusual is the ability to increase the amount of onboard memory and even enhance the speed through the use of a geometry accelerator card. This is something that's not often seen, and it makes the card a very rare collectible item. Sadly, the list of negatives is very long, thus making the card almost unusable for retro gaming. Performance is only enough for 640 by 480 generally, and forget about Direct3D games or Windows 98. Also, DOS games are not recommended due to the very small amount of memory allocated to its onboard Cirrus Logic VGA chip. If you want more, or if you at least want some texture memory, you might be waiting several years before some appear on eBay. It's the same situation with its geometry accelerator or cards alone. If you still want one for your GLQuake setup, try to go for cards with texture memory, because without it, the card is basically useless. And don't forget to check the ports behind your PCI slots, because these might get blocked by the sheer length of this card, as was the case with our IDE1 port on our test board. The Intergraph RealiZm Z13T gets 5 stars from us, as it's not completely useless, but it's more like a very rare shelf piece collector's item rather than a truly usable card for retro gaming. Now usually at the end we'll show the 3DMark demo running on the featured card, but it requires Direct3D support. So instead, you can enjoy the GLExcess demo, which is part of the XSMark benchmark. It's not as fancy, but still impressive if you consider the fact that it was made entirely by just one person, and it uses only one 3D model. Everything else is generated via OpenGL code. Enjoy!